So now that we've gone over some of the basics of brushes, giving you a little more idea how those controls work, let's talk about how to apply it to an image, starting first with an adjustment layer and then going to how we might use it on a pixel layer, a pixel mask. So these are especially powerful. This is an especially powerful tool, the brush tool is on a mask. Okay, so I'm looking at this image of a hibiscus, and what I want to do is to change the background initially. So I'm going to go ahead and add a layer mask, or sorry, add an adjustment layer, and I'm going to do it the same way we have before. I want to apply it to the background and not to, let's just go ahead and make this a little smaller. I want to apply it to the background, not to this leaf and not to the flower. And so I'm going to go ahead and use my object selection tool. Go away, instructions, I don't need you. Come on, there we go. Oh, why won't it go away? There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and start by choosing the flower. And that seems to have done a nice job. Remember, make sure you have it on this additive selection. And then I could go in. I know flower is going to stay selected, but I can also grab that leaf. A little bit mushy there, but we're not going to worry about that for now. Looks like we might want to add this stem. Let's see if the selection tool will do that for us. It does, very nice. And so now we can go ahead and just add that layer mask. I'm going to do hue and saturation. It's one of my favorites, but also I do want to desaturate this background. Before we get into doing those changes, you see that we have our layer mask, but of course we actually are going to be saturating or desaturating the flower rather than the background. So let's go ahead and do a Command I. Make sure that we have it on the right place. Go back to properties. Oops, got to make sure. By the way, this is something that will happen to you. In order to get to the adjustments, you need to be here. In order to change the mask, you'll be here. Okay, so I'm going to desaturate it to start. That looks pretty good. I'm going to darken it quite a bit. I want you to see this drama of this. And then I'm going to play around a little bit with the hue. Let's see, which way do I want to go? I think I'm going to go ahead and go a little bit cooler just to give it some drama there. It's not going to set it off so much to be in front of the leaf, but I like the way the flower is working. Okay, so I have that change, but if we look at this even from a distance, you can see that the edges are a little bit wonky, and part of this is because this image, it has such a shallow depth of field that the edges are very sharp here and they get very soft here, and especially on the leaf in the background. And so this kind of one size fits all selection tool is not quite doing it. Now you do know, of course, we could try the selected mask, and we'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit so we can play with this. We'll start it on here, and you can see how kind of raggedy it is. And one of the reasons that happened is because these areas are very because they're very blurred. The selection tool can't quite express that, and so it just kind of makes this raggedy, choppy edge. Not very nice. This can help. We'll just go ahead and play with our refine edge tool and see what happens. But you can see it's still a little raggedy, edgy here. And if we go to our on layers, it doesn't look that great. We could start there, but I'm going to go ahead and cancel out and show you a way to do this manually. And sometimes manually is just the only way to go. Okay, so let's go to the mask. And notice if we take the mask off, just pay attention to these areas. So you can see that it's kind of cropping in here and it's kind of cropping out here. It's doing a little different because here the edges are sharp, here the edges are a little soft, here the edges are very sharp, very soft. And that's where our brush comes in handy. We'll go to brush, and remember that the first thing we want to do, the size looks okay, maybe a little bigger, but the first thing we want to do is we want to check over here and check on the hardness. I'm going to start with the hardness pretty low, down about 20%. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the opacity and the flow at 100%, but we may adjust that depending on what we need. So I'm going to go in on this edge, and notice I'm not going to go right here because I'm just trying to make this edge disappear and soften. So let's make sure I'm on the right tool. No, I'm not. The last thing I need to do, did you guess it? Yes, I need to change my foreground color with that X key. And then I'm just going to start to paint along this edge. And you can see all of a sudden that is much more natural. There's a little bit of a shadow behind it, which is sort of part of the image. And all along here, this looks pretty good. Now, when we get to here, it's okay, but it gets to look a little bit too soft. So let's go back. There we go. And one of the tips that I will give you about working with a brush on a mask, especially if you're doing a lot of long work like this, is to do a little short stroke and then lift and then another short stroke and lift. Because if you want to do a backtrack, you can just do one Command C and you won't undo all of your work. So I'm going to go ahead and go back up, and I'm going to make this just a little bit harder so that I can come into this area. And you can see that is, we don't want it 100% hard, but that makes a lot more sense. Now for this area down here, and I'm not going to do the whole thing for you because there's a lot of work here. This is one of those areas where if you want to get this right, the selection is going to take some time. The good news is you're going to keep it on the mask so that you continually change it. If you put it onto the pixel layer, then you might do hours of work and discover it wasn't working well and you'd have to start all over again. But with the mask, we don't. Okay, so we're here. We have to now go to black because here it's sort of cutting into the image. And we want this to be just a little bit harder again because this edge is not quite as blurred as the other one. Now there's a little oddity going on here. Now remember, you don't need to worry when you're doing this mask about making terrible mistakes, right? Because if you really, go like that, you can do a Command C, but you can also, if I just went over like that, I can just X, go to the other color, and just start to push it back. And so I begin to have some very nice control. This I'm going to take out with a healing brush. We're not going to worry about that for now. And so I go back and forth until I get that edge looking right. Now this area here, I probably could do this area with the select and mask, but just to show you how to do it, I'm going to go to a much smaller brush. I'm not going to go all the way to the hardest. It's very rare that we want to go to the very hardest brush, but I'm going to go pretty close because, and again, Command C, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. Things look awful terrible when you zoom in, but it also gives you so much control. So I can just go along that edge and get that just right. Anytime I need to go the other way, I just X out and just tuck it into there. And again, one of the things I love about working this way is that it can be a little mushy. You don't have to be perfect. You want to sort of zoom out and check and say, oh, is that giving me the effect I want? Does it look a little weird? Maybe I do need to soften it here a little bit. This looks good. This will need to be harder. And I just keep experimenting with that. Same thing over here on this leaf. You can see that this leaf edge, very, very hard. Don't much like that. This is a great place though where we could actually use a little bit of the opacity down. We can start, let's bring this up. Don't forget to change it back. Let's go almost to the hardest. Increase our brush size a little bit and we'll just see how that's working. That looks pretty good. Actually nice, but there's this place up here that I'm going to play with. And that is up here. So you notice if I go back, I can add that in, but that looks kind of harsh. It just looks a little bit too bright. So instead, I'm going to come in, drop my opacity down, and just do it a little bit. And this actually sometimes works very well on certain edges. You can see it's so tempting to go overcorrect that. Oops, a little bit different. I think I'll change my direction. Never be afraid to just test and see if it's going to work better going the other way. And I can just keep working on it that way. So you can see that's going to be much more natural and fit into the scene much better. Now I'm going to leave these all looking ragged. Hopefully you're looking around and you can see all the places that need to be corrected, all the ways that you might stay up until 4 in the morning and play with this. But I want to do another adjustment layer and then just show you a little bit about how this might work on a pixel layer as well. So let's go ahead and add another hue and saturation. Now, sometimes beginners think it's kind of crazy that we would add more than one of the same kind of adjustment, but remember, we're adjusting different parts of the image in different ways. So I'm going to go ahead and use this mask. Remember, if we do Shift Alt or Shift Option and then drag it up, it replaces it and reverses it, which is exactly what we want. Let's go ahead and go into our properties. And if we bring up the saturation, you can see that we're going to have a lot of the same issues that we had before because of this selection. Even with those changes we made, it just feels like it's just too much saturation all over. So I'm actually going to take that back for a second. And I'm going to Option Delete, Alt Delete. I'm going to reveal the entire image. And I'm going to go back into my properties, back to my saturation. Oops, back to my saturation. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the saturation, and it's going to be way too much. Let's be really extreme. And I'm going to change that a little bit. Let's see. Oh yeah, I'm going to make it a little more yellow. Maybe make it, no, I don't want to make it too much brighter. Maybe a little darker. Cool. So, and let's take the saturation up even more. I want it really extreme. And that's over the whole thing. So we just did that wonderful desaturation and darkness in the back, and now some of it is back. So why the heck would we do that? Well, don't worry, I'm going to take it away right now. I'm going to do Command Delete, which would be Control Delete on a PC. And then again, I can use my brush. I don't really want this to get saturated all over the place. I just want to add some selective saturation, and I want it to feel kind of soft and natural, almost like a light. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my brush tool and check the size. Right now it's way too small, and it's also 39% opacity. So rule number 1, we're going to do 0. We're going to increase the size. And we're going to increase it even more. We're going to go back up to 100% opacity. And I'm going to make the size pretty darn big. So this is super soft and fully opaque. Okay, so as I do this, you can see it just very softly brings up that area. That's really nice, but it actually feels like a little bit too much saturation all over the place. So what we could do is take our opacity down and just bring it up, just bring a little bit of that saturation through. Now you're saying, why don't I just desaturate? Well, with this kind of a method, I can saturate that a little bit, and then I could bring my opacity up all the way, take my brush down, and I could do full saturation on this edge. So I can actually vary the amount of saturation that I have in any of these areas. Now, I might have gotten a little bit carried away there, but again, remember that we can make those corrections anytime we want. So this is actually a really nice way to sort of minimize and maximize all of that. I'm going to leave this desaturated, but I'm going to go ahead and just saturate the edges. And if I decide at any point, right, that that's too much, I can just go to the Command X and just start to bring it out. I can change the opacity. Now notice I'm not doing anything here. I just wanted to add that saturation in the front. Let's go ahead and zoom out so you can see what that looks like. So I added some saturation selectively there just to pop the front of that forward. I did the hue and saturation on the background. Still a lot of work to be done on this background, but it's getting closer. So I just want to show you that all of these same strategies would be and could be applied to a pixel layer. So if I do the Shift Alt or Shift Option and drag this down to this pixel layer, you can see that we apply that, and there we go. It actually reverses it and applies it here, and so now we have the flower and the leaf against this alternate background. Again, one of the exciting things that I think about Photoshop is that once we get this set up, I can turn that mask on or off. I can have the regular background. I can put that background on. I could even, of course, if I wanted to, I could add, we'll add something bright blue. Now this is going to look kooky for now because it's in the wrong place. I could put it right under here, and I could add that blue layer underneath. So all of those things are possible. Again, you'll see the places that you need to correct. Using the brush tool will help you to do that more subtly and precisely.